All right, welcome everybody. We've got our next edition of Two Girls, One Rant with Destiny Grace and Malika. We've got our special guest, Sofa. And yes, you guys did hear T's voice. He's kind of lurking in the room. Dave says magnets time.
Hey, how do they work? I mean, come on. It's got to be magic or miracles.
Oh, okay. So one day we'll do like a really off the wall, just weird podcast with shit like that. Okay, how's that?
Yes.
Okay. So we've selected now, obviously, the sea of unsolved mystery stories and cases, whether or not it involves death, disappearance, or just strange phenomenon in general, is wide and vast. But today we've narrowed it down to Destiny and I have 3 subjects apiece. Sofa has one that she has a lot of knowledge and details on that she wants to share as well. So, I guess without further ado, Destiny, did you want to start with one, or did you want me to kick it off?
I can start it off if you wanted me to.
Yeah, go for it. Let's hear it.
One of my favorite unsolved cases is definitely Elisa Lam. Most people have heard about it, but just in case for anybody who hasn't, I am curious to see. And also at the end of each one, we can do like a little thing where we ask you guys like, is this something you believe, or how do you think it happened, or what happened in the end? So we'll leave that to the end after each subject. So on January 26th in 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian tourist, Elisa Lam, checked into the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. On February 19th, I don't know how many days that is, almost like 20-something days after she checked in, her naked body was found floating in a 4x8-foot water tank on the roof that supplied water to the entire hotel. First of all, let's discuss the fact that the only reason they thought to check the roof water tank was because the guests kept complaining about low water pressure in the hotel. I want to gag talking about it. I regret getting a chicken sandwich before this.
Oh no.
One couple even stated that the water would come out of the faucets black before normalizing to clear, and that they just assumed that the water was bad because it was LA, and they said the water even had a strange taste. I was like, why would you drink it if it came out black? Anyways,
Holy T, ew.
It's gross. Elisa first checked into the hotel. When she first checked in, she was originally supposed to be in a hostel style room, which, for those who don't know, typically it's when you share a room with other roommates, like a bunk bed situation. But ended up moving because she went to her own private room because her roommates had complained that she was experiencing odd behavior. So that's going to tie in coming up. The last time she was seen was via the elevator surveillance footage. Guys, if you have not seen that footage, you have to look it up. It's absolutely freaky. It's not graphic. It's just strange the way she moves around in the footage, especially given that this is her last time seen alive.
If someone finds a link to that video, go ahead and post it in Discord.
I'll find it.
And while she's doing that, for those who don't want to look it up or would just like me to describe, she steps into the elevator and she turns to the button panel and just pushes all buttons to each floor. There's like 4 or 5 buttons. During this time, the elevator's doors didn't close and remained open for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't know if the elevator was malfunctioning or what happened. But after clicking all the buttons, she cautiously peers out of the elevator doors, I guess to maybe see if someone was blocking the doors or holding the button for the doors to stay open. But she saw no one in the hallway and kind of scooted back in. Still, even after all this time, the doors still have not closed. This is where that odd behavior comes in. She backs up against the corner of the elevator near the button panel, very stiff-like, as if she's scared and hiding. Like, you know how you push yourself up against a wall with your palms flat against the wall and your shoulders are all scrunched up? She just looked scared. She's staring at the still open elevator doors as if anticipating someone to step in with her. And then she slowly steps out of the elevator for a few seconds, peers down the hall again, really timid. Then while outside of the elevator doors, she does this weird little shuffle to the left. It's very robotic. Then steps backwards into the elevator with very calculated steps. Again, it's just better to see this in person if you can find the link or look at the link. It's just very strange how she moves. And the very last part of that surveillance footage, she's standing in the hallway and her hands are out in front of her. She's like bending her hands back at the wrist in very strange motions, almost like she's possessed. And like her hands are just moving in a very weird way. And then she's gone. She just walks off. So obviously at that point, like that's the last time she was seen. She somehow ended up in the water tank naked on the rooftop. Now, the toxicology report says there were no drugs or alcohol in her system, so that's absolutely ruled out. She was bipolar, and she took 4 different medications to help with that. So it could have been maybe her strange behavior was due to the medication messing with her, or maybe she didn't take her medicine. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what happens when you stop taking your bipolar medications. Another theory is that she was murdered, so somebody else did this to her. However, the autopsy showed no evidence of trauma to her body anywhere. There would have been some sort of strangulation or some sort of bruising if it was a struggle. So if it wasn't drugs or alcohol, or that she was murdered, we'd assume that maybe she climbed into the water tank herself, right? First of all, how did she get on the roof? In order to get on the roof, she would either have to climb up the entire fire escape. You have to go out of a window. And I don't think that her room had a window. I'm not sure on that part, but she would have to climb through a window to get up the fire escape to climb onto the roof. Or she'd have to go through the rooftop door that would set off an alarm. But that obviously it was locked, 1, and 2, no alarms were heard that day. Let's say she somehow miraculously got on the roof herself. She would have had to get onto the tank platform, climb up a 10-foot ladder, open a 20-pound tank lid while on the ladder, and get into the tank, and even then somehow close the lid after she got into the tank. I don't know if you know, but when you're in a tank full of water that's 8 foot tall, you're not able to really push or pull anything because you're bobbing in water. So that's going to be kind of difficult to try to close a hatch when you're floating in water. Don't forget that for some reason she was naked. The clothes were found inside of the tank, mind you. So I don't know if she stripped naked beforehand and tossed her clothes in, or if she stripped while she was in the tank, or if somebody planted the clothes in there. Not sure. Last theory is obviously the weirdest theory, which is ghosts, of course. The hotel is notoriously haunted. There's way too many things related to this to go over because, we only have but so much time. But one big thing is that numerous people would often jump to their death from this hotel, to the point where longtime residents of the hotel would refer to the hotel as the suicide, which, if she did this herself, could be something. I believe in spirits and stuff, but I feel like that one's a little bit of a reach. But in the end, this was ruled as an accidental drowning. What do you guys think? Do you think that if somebody murdered her, do you think somebody did this to her? Do you think that she did this herself and just it was a miracle that she somehow got into the tank and closed the lid?
Well, here's another interesting thing too, because I stumbled across this while looking for ideas. They said that the lid to the tank was locked on the outside when they found it, after her body was already inside. I don't know how true that is based off of, because the source I had was just covering things like we were, but...
The thing I like to notate is, first of all, she is a very petite woman. She would not be able to withstand that kind of heft and weight if she were to be handling all these things herself. And it's been known or seen that if you have some kind of, I don't know if you would call it spiritual or some kind of ghost presence, that kind of adds a sense of strength to you. So if that is the case, she would have been able to have that kind of strength to lift lids or break open certain pieces. The thing about this case is, unfortunately, we don't know for sure if it was murder, because if she's in water, that gets rid of a lot of evidence. because she was in there for almost 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We would
Ew.
not be able to hold on to any kind of fingerprints from her or fibers or anything that would connect to a murder per se.
Well, and based off the video, it looked like she was of Asian descent. So I mean, she looked like she had that typical petite build for that. I don't know if it would be murder or not. Like Destiny said, chat. What do you guys think?
She was acting really strange beforehand. I mean, even in the hallway, she looked like she was talking to somebody, just by her weird nature.
Like she was scared.
Right, and even the roommates had complained, like, she's acting super weird. We want her out of this room. So, what? She wasn't on drugs. She wasn't drunk. The only thing that can explain her odd behavior would have been either she was in some sort of trouble that she didn't mention to anybody, and maybe she was, I don't know, losing her mind, or maybe somebody was after her, and I don't know. But from what I remember reading, she was she was friends with everybody. She didn't have any kind of enemies.
Yeah, because to me, I'm thinking there's the part of it to me seems like it could have been a paranormal event, which is known to happen once in a blue moon. To this kind of degree, but not very often. But then there's also the logical part of me that thinks that, all right, well, you have bipolar, but because what year was this?
2013.
2013. Okay.
Past
Well,
decade.
because I'm thinking typical bipolar does not have like if she was having hallucinations or anything, it doesn't have that kind of psychosis part with it. But if she didn't take her meds, depending on what medication she was on, that could be a factor. But I also know with certain types of bipolar, you do have a psychosis factor.
Right.
Yeah.
And it may not have been included in the report, or it might have been not diagnosed. So those could also contribute to her. Maybe she was seeing something that wasn't there, and it drove her crazy and made her paranoid. It's hard to say.
Or maybe she saw something and nobody else did, and that's what got her. I don't know. It's just
Creepy music.
strange. It's strange, just that whole situation. Like, is there a chance that maybe she could have somehow gotten into the tank, maybe grabbed onto the inside and pulled it shut when she dropped in? Maybe. But it's still very strange, especially when you add in the whole, there's a potential evidence that the outside of it was locked after she'd gotten in.
Right.
But that's the basic synopsis of that one.
Because, I mean, as far as lock goes, I mean, it was 2 weeks that this had gone by. I mean, maybe a maintenance person says, hey, where'd that lock's missing, and let me put that back on there. Or maybe somebody murdered her, dumped her in, and relocked it. Who knows?
Yeah, there would have to be no struggle, though. So, I'm trying to think of what I would think it is. And I was going to say, I think maybe like a custodian or something did it, because they would know how to get to the rooftop without triggering anything. But at the same time, to get her up there, she'd have to not be struggling. Which I'm sure, if you throw out a gun or something like that, obviously they'll do what you need them to do. So there's a chance that maybe she was told to go up to the rooftop, strip naked, and then get into the tank. I don't know. Or maybe she was told to get into the tank, she took her clothes off to try to float better.
Yeah, because have you ever tried treading water fully dressed?
Right.
Difficult, yeah.
Yeah, because that's one thing that, in high school, one of the gym classes I had to take, you had to jump into a pool fully clothed to know how it feels, and then while you do that, because you got your swimsuit on underneath, but you had to strip while in the water.
But you had a swim pool in your school?
Yes.
Jesus.
So I have a couple other points to make, and I'm just kind of looking up a little bit more. She traveled alone to California. So there could be a possibility that maybe she's trying to escape someone or some kind of situation where she was. She went to, I guess, the San Diego Zoo, and she posted that on social media. And then she checked into the hotel, and it's near Skid Row, which has a lot of crime there. So she's traveling alone in an area that has a lot of crime, gang activity, and maybe there was, on top of the fact that she was in a group of friends that were kind of seeing her odd behavior, she was scared because she was young. So that might have connected more to kind of some outside environment issues that may have contributed to why she was scared and why she was acting so strange in that elevator.
Well, and if
Right.
that place acted like a halfway house as well, I mean, that would fit into that theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think personally, I think the best thing I can think of is that somebody targeted her. They didn't necessarily, because obviously there was no evidence of the R word. There was no evidence of anything like that. It was just maybe somebody just had a sick, sadistic, twisted brain and saw her in the hallway and maybe like pointed a gun and said, "I need you to come with me. If you don't comply, then I'll shoot you," or something like that. So she just maybe complied, followed this person up to the roof. He told her to get in. She got in, and if it was locked, then there's that. Locked it from the outside, just left her there, and kind of relished in the fact that he knew that, or he or she knew that they were going to drown. I don't know, because obviously there's nothing you can do in an 8-foot tank, especially when you're like a 5-foot petite girl. So she took her clothes off in the tank, trying to stay as buoyant as she could. I imagine if she screamed, she probably wouldn't be heard in that thing.
No. And especially on top of a hotel that is in a very busy city. Sirens, people all around. I mean, you have too many sounds going on. They wouldn't be able to hear her.
Yeah. That's what I think. That's just my suspicion. Obviously, it's a lot of different key points in here, but that's one that I think is a decent theory, because I don't think she would have been able to do that herself.
No, because thinking
No.
about it too, it depends on where the water level is compared to where the top of the tank is. Even an athletic person would have difficulties trying to shut that.
Yeah.
So, and it kind of sounds like chat's in consensus with us. It's either a murder or going off of her medications.
Psychological.
Yeah,
Less
psychological.
paranormal, psychological, or actual crime.
That's still freaky though, because I remember seeing that video elsewhere before, and I didn't know it was related to this until I saw it again. And I'm just like, holy shit. So it's just, it's strange. And like a lot of the stories that I have were not from anything modern. And I consider like modern, like in the last 20 years.
Right.
So considering that, 2013, there's a lot of social media and everything else, a lot more surveillance. So for something like that, so strange and bizarre to happen in a modern time, to me is just kind of mind-blowing. And I think that's why it rates at the top of the list for a lot of searches like this for unsolved mysteries.
Agreed.
All right. Ready for the next one?
All right, yeah. So I'm going to kick it off with the Isdal Woman. So this takes us to Norway.
Ooh.
No, and this kind of reads like a spy novel in a Cold War mystery, because this is taking us back to November 29th, 1970 in Bergen, Norway. And I do apologize if I slaughter names here, because I can't pronounce
Norway.
other languages. It's Norway. They have a very different way of pronouncing the words that we see in English. Anyway, but the body was found by two hikers. It was a father hiking with his daughter in the valley. So the woman's body was found. It is Bergen. Okay, so I did say it right.
Yay.
Yay! All right, I get it right once in a while. So the woman's body is found face up, her hands clenched into fists near her torso, and the whole front of her body had been burned.
Just the front?
Just the front, not the back. All right, so there were several items recovered near her body. I'm not going to list them. I'll post a link to the Wikipedia of this if you want to see the finer details like that, but most of the items that were found near the body don't really have an impact on the story, except for the fact that many of the items were found with some fire damage. Many of the identifying factors were either rubbed or scratched off or removed in some way. They originally thought that this was suicide, but the autopsy revealed phenobarbital, which is an anticonvulsive drug that's used with seizures, but it can make you pass out because of that, but also poisoning by carbon monoxide. Soot was found in her lungs, indicating that she had been buried alive. Bruises on her neck suggested injury by fall or a blow. And her stomach showed the consumption of between 40 and 50 Phenomol, which are sleeping pills, a brand of sleeping pills, with additional pills found nearby the body.
That seems too.
Wow, that's extreme.
That seems very set up. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a bottle of liquor, watch.
Mind you, I know nothing about this story. By the way, this is the first time I'm hearing about this one.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre, but it does really sound like a setup. So the other odd part is that while there was fire damage to the items and to the body, there was no fire nearby, no campfire, nothing. And she was not dressed for the weather either. So her identity to this day is still unknown, but because of the autopsy reports, they launched an investigation. Now, so the name of the Isdal Woman comes from Isdalen, which is the name of the valley where she was found. It means ice valley. So when I say that she wasn't dressed for the weather, you know, I mean, she's wearing just a typical jumper. Like, this is the 1970s. So, like, a typical jumper, maybe a coat, some stockings, and some shoes. But she was not wearing the rainproof or the weather-resistant gear that a hiker would typically wear. Now, we should also note that the nearby mountain that this is to is Ulrikren. And I just slaughtered the fuck out of that. And its nickname is for the valley, because of the mountain, is Death Valley. Back in the medieval ages, those who were no longer productive to the village or their family and they were now a burden would climb up the mountain, usually accompanied by somebody else, and jump to their death. Now, the somebody else being there is because if they hesitated or decided last minute they didn't want to do it because they feared the death, then somebody would just give them a little push off the mountain. Now, keep in mind, this is the medieval ages.
This reminds me a lot of Midsummer.
Yeah. So it got the nickname of Death Valley for Isdalen. Yes, Viking lore, Stromberg, Viking lore. All right, so now they found her belongings 3 days later at the railway station. Among the items contained clothing, wigs, makeup, maps, and currencies for different countries, and passports, all with different names and aliases. So they could not identify her because all the different documentations that she had was for different people. So
she's set up.
Yeah, so this really sounds like a spy thing now, because I mean, like, she's got the kit to make herself look different and fit in and everything else. So a picture based on, because like, you couldn't really identify exactly what she looked like, but based off of the structure of the what remained, they did kind of like a little mock picture and sent it around to different countries that she had these passports for. Many reports of sightings were given, even decades later. I think the last one was like 1991. Somebody finally reported to see her. So. But one of the earliest reports when investigating was that 3 days before the body was found, a hiker had seen her with two men hiking up through the valley. When he got near, the conversation stopped as if he had interrupted them, and he kept on his way. And she seemed very pensive, like very keeping it together, confident, but kind of like knowing you're in danger. But he thought nothing of it because, I mean, 1970, it's somebody else's business. You typically don't get involved. So she did get buried on February 5th in 1971. She had a Catholic burial, of all things, even though they didn't know the woman's religion, because the names for all of her aliases were the names of saints, and she is in an unmarked grave. Charred, I'm not going to say burnt to a crisp, because the reports don't actually indicate how burned that she was. It did say to the point of making her unidentifiable. So I'm guessing that most of the hair, if not all, was burned away. The face was pretty much fucked up.
And it was only the front part, like the
Yes.
front of her body was burned.
Yeah. Well, and the soot in her lungs. So soot is not necessarily. I don't know about the burying alive part according to what I had read. Because, like, let's say that they made her pass the fuck out and then put her on top of a fire so only the front part gets burned. She could easily have inhaled a lot of soot, and because soot comes from as a byproduct of fires, not
Mhm.
earth.
What I'm thinking is if they did that intentionally, like she was laid on her front torso on top of a fire, which explains why she was burnt on just her front side. It would get rid of a lot of identifying characteristics of who she is, like facial features, teeth, or at least not necessarily teeth like the teeth themselves because it's bone, but like the alignment of them. So dental
Yeah.
records couldn't be identified. So she would literally just be a mystery to whoever is trying to look for her.
Did they
Well,
remove her
okay.
teeth, or did the teeth stay in? Because I feel like teeth are the biggest identifier as to who someone is, because your dental structure is very unique almost to each person.
Right, but this is 1970. I don't think dental records
Mhm.
like that really existed back then. No
That's true.
mention in anything that I found actually mentioned. There was no special dental work or anything that was done. So, like,
It would just mean that like whatever characteristics that would identify her as her from
yes.
someone else, it would be gone.
No, I completely
she got-
agree.
I think she got
Yeah.
007'd. I think another
Mhm.
spy or something like that caught on to her, got rid of her,
Mm-hmm.
or whoever she was working against got a hold of her.
Like, I
Especially
mean,
given the time.
oh yeah, given the time,
1970, it's
yeah. I mean, Cold War is going on strong at this point,
right.
and espionage was huge. So it really does sound like from all the descriptions given, like of her items, things that were found here, the fact that like any kind, like if she had a unique tattoo, or if she had identifying marks on her face that so you could tell who exactly she was, like burning the
Mhm.
front of her would get rid of all of that evidence. And
Mhm.
so I think it is why only the front of her was burned. But all the effects that she had on her that they found at the railway station, the fact that she had two men escorting her through the hills 3 days before her body was found. I mean, this all points to she was a spy, she got busted and taken out.
And autopsy results too. I mean,
Did-
there's no way that
All
you would be
those
able to survive
drugs.
any of the drugs and the soot on top of it. It's like they took extra precautions to make sure she ain't waking up, for sure.
Because that's
I
a
wonder how they
she has to
convinced her to take all of those pills, though. Were they just like, listen, do you want a nice, soft death? Do you just want to go to sleep? Or do you want me to stab you 1,000 times? Which one do you want? And she probably was like, I'll take the pills.
they could have been force fed to her.
That's true as well. But you said, aren't they on a hike? Isn't that kind of difficult to do? And it's not like they come equipped with a funnel.
Well, they were on a hike, so I mean, they could have had. Okay, so for the phenobarbital that knocked her out, they could have given her that because that was actually in her system, and the pills were found in her stomach. So my guess is that they could have force fed her the other first set of pills, even in a crushed up method, and made her drink it.
Mm-hmm.
And as before she completely passed out, as she's in kind of a really doped up state, made her swallow all the other pills. Because, I
Ugh.
mean, if this was just a suicide, this is a very elaborate suicide. Like, nobody committing suicide is planning out this kind of detail.
No, somebody wanted to make sure that she was absolutely going to be dead.
If it's a suicide of something like a spy, it would make sense why she went through all the trouble to get the sleeping agents and the pills in her to make sure she didn't feel anything, and also leave her belongings like far away.
Yeah,
Next to her.
if I wanted to do suicide, or I wanted to, I like to say unalive myself. If I wanted
Okay.
to unalive myself as a spy, I would just make sure that I would just disappear to the whole world. I would burn everything that I owned before I even
Oh, that's
did
true.
anything. Like, I would have no ties to anything. They wouldn't understand who I was.
Maybe she wasn't a good spy.
Maybe not.
She was an apprentice. She was an intern.
That's why they killed her.
There you go.
You suck.
Well, here's the other thing too. It is the Cold War, so there, I agree with T that there are more efficient ways to disposing of her, but also, like, given the time and everything else, I mean, maybe they were trying to extract information out of her before they disposed of her, and maybe they also wanted to send a message when her body was found. Because people were able to identify her based off of the picture that got made. So whatever the host country was, maybe it was a kind of a secret message to them of, hey, we found her. Don't fuck with us.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I have posted in chat a link to the wiki page for it for anybody wanting additional information.
Yeah. Crazy mystery, though, that's for sure. Because given the time frame, there's so many unanswered questions regarding all the other factors that can't be explained.
Yeah, but I think the evidence points pretty strongly towards, she was doing something sketchy, got busted, and taken out for it.
Or she knew too much,
Definitely.
and then somebody wanted to make sure to rectify that.
Better than the man who knew too little. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. He thinks he's on one of those set up, like, they're just working with actors and stuff on, like, a spy mission, and you're just working with actor to actor, and ends up being on an actual spy mission, and he thinks it's a play the whole time.
Yeah. It's in there.
All right. So I think that's it. You want to do the next one, Destiny?
Or Sofa?
Doesn't matter. I can do mine if you'd like.
Is Sofa only doing one?
Yeah.
I only have one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then I can go. I can do one.
And then we'll squeeze Sofa right in the middle.
Sounds good.
So this one is about the disappearance of the Sodder children, spelled Sodder, in case anybody wanted to look it up. So, back in 1945, the night before Christmas in All Through House, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, Jenny and George Sodder, along with her 9 other children, were asleep in their home when a fire started in the house around 1 a.m. So it's the 2 parents and their 9 children. George, Jenny, and 4 of their 9 children managed to escape the fire. The 5 that remained in the house did not. They shared 2 bedrooms between them. It was 2 sons in one room and 3 girls in the other, and both rooms were upstairs. Keep in mind, all rooms were upstairs. So that's going to come into a key part of this, because remember, the parents and 4 of their children made it out, but 5 of them didn't. They were all located upstairs in the bedrooms, if I'm not mistaken. George, the father, tried to save the rest of the children after obviously they got outside and 4 of them were okay. But when he brought back into the house, the staircase was completely on fire. When he went out to grab his ladder, it was missing from its usual spot. So the next idea he had was to park either one of his 2 coal trucks. It's like an old style vehicle, like just think you're back in the 40s, so it's like a super old car, like truck. But mysteriously, neither one of those trucks would start up. One of the children ran to a neighboring house to call the fire department, but the operator did not respond. Remember, these times you had to have an operator connect you. When another neighbor tried to call, that person also received no response. Which, I mean, it's the day before Christmas, so I guess maybe she was busy. I don't know. The same neighbor drove into town and tracked down the fire chief. Still, even though the fire station was only 2.5 miles away from the Sodder home, firefighters didn't reach the home until 8 a.m., which was 7 hours after the fire began. By the time they arrived, the house was literally a pile of ash. It only took 45 minutes for the whole house to burn down. I think it's time to reevaluate the fire truck staff there.
I was gonna say, like, even on a volunteer basis up here where everything's so far apart, like, they have response times better than that. Dear God.
Right. I mean, I get that it's the day before Christmas, but at the same time, or the night before Christmas, but it's still a situation of, like, you are an emergency responder. You should have been there I can understand, like, maybe being an hour late if it's just like, sorry, we're so backed up. We have, other things we're also doing. But 7? There's a lot of things you could do in 7 hours. So authorities searched through the ashes from the fire in an attempt to find any evidence of the 5 missing children, but they did not find any bones. No teeth, no bones, and just presume they were dead. They just, I guess, assumed that they were cremated by the heat of the fire. But I don't know if anybody else knows, but when someone's cremated, there are always bones left behind, or
least
someone or
teeth.
something. Right? There's something.
always
Like
teeth, yeah.
you cremate your animal or your loved ones, there's something left behind. And when you get a body cremated, it typically burns at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, and it's done. But the Sodder home only burned for 45 minutes, and in those temperatures definitely didn't get up to 2,000 degrees. The cause of the fire was eventually deemed to be bad wiring in the house. However, George had the power company inspect the wiring in the home earlier that year, and everything was in safe working order. There's like records of him having the inspector inspect everything and make sure everything was good and everything was great. Weeks after the kid's death, quote unquote, George and Jenny began to suspect that their children did not die in the fire, but that they were kidnapped and that the home was deliberately set on fire. Reason being, George was an immigrant from Italy. Where they lived, there was a small Italian immigrant community, one that George was very vocal, particularly his disliking to Mussolini, which was the Italian dictator then.
Ooh.
This sparked some heated debates in the community. So George never really revealed why he left Italy, leading some to suspect that maybe he was involved with some questionable business in Italy. But obviously he's in that Italian immigrant group, and he's vocalizing that he does not like the Italian dictator at the time. So obviously he's going to make some enemies, because most of the community did not like the fact that he was so vocal about that. Here are some things that back the idea that the children could have been kidnapped. In the fall before the fire occurred, so just months before, a life insurance salesman, and I'm not kidding when I quote this, by the way, a life insurance salesman visited the home to solicit life insurance. And when the Sodders turned him away, he became upset, saying, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini. I'm not kidding you. This happened months before." I was like, well, I guess case closed. We know who fucking did it. It was the life insurance salesman, right? Well, on the night of the fire, the phone rang. Jenny got out of bed to answer. She's obviously upstairs, so she's going downstairs to answer the phone. When she made her way downstairs, she noted that the lights in the house were still on, which, why? You're paying for more electricity that way. But anyways, she noted that the lights were still on downstairs when she went downstairs. After she answered the phone, whatever call it was, she went back upstairs and started falling asleep. But as she was falling asleep, she heard a loud bang on the roof, followed by something rolling on the roof. But I guess she just thought it was nothing, like maybe it was a squirrel that jumped from a tree or something and just fell into the house. An hour later is when the fire started. Now remember the thing where the lights were still on downstairs? If the house caught on fire due to faulty wiring, there wouldn't have been power to the house. And they said that when they went to escape the house, the lights downstairs were still on, all of them. So like the house was ablaze and the lights were still working at the time they were trying to leave the house. There were reported sightings of the children after the fire as well. One waitress at a nearby breakfast place said that she served them breakfast and notated that there was a car with a Florida license plates tied with the children. So she served them breakfast. It just seemed normal, so she didn't really think anything of it. Another woman says that she saw 4 of the 5 children check into a hotel about 10 minutes away with 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian descent. George and Jenny ended up hiring a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley, which just sounds very 50s. C.C. Tinsley here. Tinsley discovered the member of the coroner's jury who decided that the Sodder house fire was an accident was the same insurance agent that threatened him in the fall. So Tinsley basically realized that the person who threatened the family was the person that basically said, yeah, the house burned down because of faulty wiring. How does that happen? These Italian immigrants, whoever's trying to get their revenge, definitely somehow weaseled their way into trying to make the house look like it was an accidental fire versus deliberate.
This is like
Just
some
my-
major like Godfather shit here.
Right.
T's wondering again. I know you mentioned it, but what year was this again?
1945.
45. Okay. Ooh.
Yeah,
Well,
it was
yeah, I
well
know.
back.
I know on the East Coast there was a lot of Italian activity, and the mob was changing from what it was in the 20s to a more modern version as well during that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway,
So that he found that out, which I think it was just strange. Like, how does that happen? That person really, this was really pre-planned. They knew what they were doing. After some time, the case was closed, and Jordan and Jenny's last resort was to put up a billboard that stayed up for 40 years following the incident. I'm not gonna, if you guys wanted to look at the billboard, you can, but it's basically got the photos of the children that went missing, and then it just gives a synopsis of what happened, what they think. They think that kids were kidnapped. They think that they're somewhere out there, and they just want them to come home, kind of thing. There's a couple theories that on the kids' disappearance. Some believe the mafia was involved. Others believes that the children were sold to orphanages. It could be both. And lastly, on this case, in 1968, so 23 years later, a letter came in addressed to Jenny, the mother, and her only. It was a photograph of a man in his late 20s, which George and Jenny believed to be their youngest missing son that went missing that night of the fire, whose name was Lewis, and he was 9 at the time of the fire. There was no return address on the photo, but it was postmarked in Kentucky, and on the back of the photograph, it stated the following: Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, and then it gives a bunch of numbers. Now, the kid looked very similar to their son, Lewis, that was 9 at the time. The dark-haired features, dark eyes, certain kind of shape of eyebrows. They basically said an older version of their son. And on top of that, the back of it said Lewis Sodder. The son, named Lewis, was one of the kids that went missing. Then again, it could be foul play. Somebody could be like, I look like him. Let me give them some false hope.
yeah, the imposter shit seems to happen in a lot of
Right.
high-profile cases.
So, last thing that they did, because obviously that was postmarked in Kentucky, George and Jenny hired a detective to go to Kentucky to investigate, but that detective went missing and was never heard from again. And
That is some major mafia shit right there.
there's some shit happening with that. I don't want to touch it. Even talking about it. Listen, mafia, if you're listening, I don't want any part of this.
Disclaimer.
I was gonna say, like, you're half Italian too, aren't you?
No, she's not.
No, I'm Irish.
You're-
All Irish.
Hey, welcome to the club. Let's go to a pub.
I think it's really interesting to kind of see how these like powerhouses have just kind of influenced life around the planet. Like obviously Mussolini in Italy had his huge following, socialism I think it was, and then moving it to the States where people thought they were escaping a lot of that power, and we have this happen. Something like this
Mhm.
happen. I honestly don't know. I think there is definitely some shady stuff, and I think that possibly the kids are still alive. If they are alive today, because I know they would probably be very old or possibly have passed by now, but I think they survived that fire because there is nothing that was left of them, even after the temperatures didn't get that high enough to completely disintegrate them.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the dad, like they searched through the ash, but even then, like they would go back and visit and try to continue to find any kind of bones. There was no bones found, no evidence of bones. Now, one of the kids did find like a plastic item that the dad believed was a pineapple bomb. I think that's what it was called, like a pineapple bomb.
Pineapple bomb?
Pineapple bomb, yeah. And
Okay.
it's some sort of like 40s, 50s like grenade kind of thing. But I don't think that
Oh.
would trigger a fire. It would just trigger an explosion. So I don't think that really has anything to do with
Frag
it.
grenade, that's what it is. From Al Capone. It was a long-range weapon of Al Capone's gang. So that explains it. I mean, you have
Huh.
gangs, you have mafia, you have mob, you have that connection. So if there was actually a bomb there with that style, it kind of all adds up.
Yeah, possible. I mean, I think it's foul play. I feel like insurance salesman uh is probably one of the big keys behind it, where he was also an Italian immigrant, and he didn't like that George was talking shit about Mussolini, and was like, we don't tolerate this, and maybe even Mussolini had something to do with it. Who knows?
Yeah, Strom is saying that wood fires get to about 900 degrees Celsius, which let me look at the translation for that.
And given the fact that this is an older style home, it wouldn't be any kind of incendiary material that would cause it to go higher in temperature.
Yeah, so 900 Celsius is 1652 Fahrenheit, so that would not be high enough heat to disintegrate all bones.
Yeah, like I said, typically when you get a body cremated, it's 2 hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The house only burned for 45 minutes. So I don't think the temperatures got hot enough. And I mean, yeah, it could cremate the flesh and the blood and the muscle,
Right.
but the bone is something where it's like there's no trace of bones that were left behind. That's what's really like,
Especially in a fast fire like that.
And you're fine, Stromberg. I mean, we've got Google to look up the translation. You're used to the metric system, so use what you're used to. We'll translate. It is no big deal, because I'm sure we say things in units of measurement that may be hard for people used to a metric system to visualize, although you guys seem a bit more well-versed in both than we are. So, but yeah,
Good old America translation and metric or anti-metric.
Yes, Croc,
Yeah,
I learned how to make a flamethrower.
I think that the kids were probably yanked from the bedroom. Somehow, I don't know how it wasn't heard before the fire started, but I think that maybe when the mom heard stuff on the roof, maybe that was them grabbing the kids out, and I guess leaving the rest to die. So maybe that's what happened. They took the kids, and I think that they probably sold them to orphanages.
But here's what I get too. I mean, there has to be more to the story behind the scenes, like maybe some private dealings. Because
there's plenty, but I just can't go over everything.
Oh no,
but there's absolutely like the poor dad. Dad is like doing everything he can to figure out where his kids are. There was 40 leads. He went to all of them. He was searching them himself because like the police just gave up. Because they were like, we know it's with the Italian mafia. We're not trying to fuck with that.
Oh yeah, they would not touch like certain. Even today, it's hard to touch a lot of those groups. But I'm thinking like what leading up to the incident, there's got to be more dealings with that. Because you would think that if they were just trying to use it as collateral, there would be some kind of what's the word I'm thinking of?
Like money exchange kind of thing?
Yeah, money exchange kind of thing. There's an actual word for it, but
I was trying to think of it too.
And I'm brain dead. Ransom, that's it. I'm like, it starts with an R. Yeah, they would want some kind of try to extract some kind of ransom, and not necessarily money, but it could be with actions or agreements or deals that they were trying to get him to do. But I don't know if any of that came up in some of the different angles that you had looked at Destiny.
No, I didn't see anything about ransoms. It just, the way that everything was, all of the evidence lined up, it sounds like they were just trying to punish George for being so vocal about being against the Italian dictator. And it just sounds like this was their way of punishing him. Like, we're going to take 5 of your 4 children, and you're never going to see them again. You're going to think they died in a fire, but we actually made money off of them. Or maybe the eldest boy, I think the eldest boy was like 14. Maybe they brought him in. They took him back to Italy to train him to be one of their people. I don't know. The girls were probably sold into slavery or some sort of weird undermarket weird thing.
Yeah, the human trade that even goes on today. So
that could have been their way of making money out of the situation, but also punishing the dad.
That would make sense too, depending on the extent of, because like just being vocal about it isn't going to merit this kind of attention from the Italian mafia. It's going to go well beyond that, but I'm sure that they don't have anything documented. He's not going to just chime into the police and tell them about it, because that alone could get you killed by your own people.
Yeah. And I think at the time too, with Mussolini being in such power, I mean, that's all about taking over the world. So if you have this group of people on the other side of the world that are saying, "Oh, this person's bad, let's rise up against them," rather than trying to kind of overcome that, just get rid of those people, and then now you can take over another country, another part of the world. So it might have been a power play too.
That is still really odd, though. But yeah, there had to have been a lot of other dealings. So, Chad, what do you think? Mafia hit? It's what it's really sounding like to me, is mafia hit.
The world may never know. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's what I think. I think it was something to do with that whole, like, insurance salesman saying the exact things that happened.
Ended
he
up
said
happening.
what would happen, and it happened.
Yeah, T saying definitely meant to send a message.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll chalk that one up on.
I think so too. There's a lot of unanswered questions surrounding that, and I don't think we'll ever find out.
Especially given the time it was too. It's not too recent in history that we can go back and comb through some of the evidence surrounding it.
No,
may not ever know.
And even if they do have evidence surrounding it, it might be too early yet to declassify.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation, things get declassified at different intervals in time, depending on the sensitivity of the material. Because, I mean, what was included then might be relevant to some ongoings today. You never know.
That's true, too. There could be some connections.
All right. So, Sofa, you have the Smiley Face murders. You want to tell us about that?
Yes. So, throughout the Midwest, between the 1990s and the late 2000s, there have been a lot of young male college students that have gone missing. And all of their bodies have been exhumed from waterways, like streams and rivers. So these men have all been very popular. They've been athletic. They're intelligent, like they're really doing well in college, high achievers. So it's not really the typical stereotype of who gets in trouble and who gets killed, murdered, whatnot.
Right.
These men all shared the same story of how they turned up missing. Prior to being declared missing, they were all out at night having drinks at a bar or party. Now, these are different locations too, but they all share the same story. After a couple drinks, they would leave that bar or that party, and they would be visibly affected by the alcohol. Were they intoxicated? No. But they would show like they were stumbling, they were not in the right mindset. And then they go missing. Most of these men, when their bodies were exhumed from the water, show that there was GHB in their bloodstream. And GHB is a date rape drug. It's rubies. Near where their bodies are found is a smiley face that's spray painted. It could be on a rock, it could be on concrete, but it is a very general smiley face. So the fact that these bodies are coming up in the water kind of displays any kind of evidence being gone. Because it's in water, it gets rid of a lot of that evidence. But the mystery has a few factors. First is the lack of decomposition. So if a body is in the water for a long period of time, it's going to break down and you're going to be left with very little. When these bodies were found, they were in good condition. Maybe there was still rigor mortis. Maybe there was clothes still on the body, but there wasn't any kind of decomposition, especially when these bodies turned up weeks or months later.
So I have updated the background of the stream for the moment to kind of show the map that you gave me of all the different places that the bodies had been found.
Yes. And you can kind of tell too, which is kind of the mystery on top of what I'm going through right now, but it looks like a smiley face. It seems too ironic to kind of pass up. So on top of the decomposition, exactly, DJ, it looks like a smile with a head. So on top of the decomposition is the placement of the bodies. A lot of the bodies were found in an area where police search and cadaver dogs and community citizens have already come through prior, but there were no bodies before. So it just kind of showed up. A lot of the police involvement, and police rule that a lot of the drownings are either accidental or undetermined because of alcohol, and they rule out any kind of foul play. They rule out any kind of murder. Even though the positions of those bodies indicate that the deaths are definitely not accidental. There was one student from the University of Minnesota. His body was found encased in ice in the Mississippi River with his hands folded across his chest, which is in a very odd position and inconsistent with just some random chance drowning.
That's like
you
if
don't
rigor
drown.
mortis set in before the body was dumped in the water.
Exactly. So it's the effect of how water is on evidence. It doesn't add up, and it makes for the perfect crime because it gets rid of all that. So you could technically get away with murder if it's around water, or so we're seeing with this. And it's kind of a question and we can even talk about too, like, why are the police automatically going to classify these as accidental drownings and not investigate it further? Why is it an accident and not murder? There was also a couple cases too. First was Tommy Booth. He was 24 and he disappeared on January of 2008 from a bar. He'd been celebrating 21st birthday, and surveillance captured him entering the bar, and there was no video evidence of him leaving. But 2 weeks after he went missing, he was found face down in a creek behind the bar. No signs of trauma. The area has been searched weeks before,
Wait, hold on.
but no one saw them.
He was found at the same bar that he was last at?
A creek behind it, yep.
Wow.
But before, when they searched the area, they didn't find his body then. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later. And the former detective, when the body was found, said that the body was in full rigor mortis, which usually dissipates about a day or two after someone's killed. So it doesn't make sense when it's weeks later that the body is in rigor mortis.
When does rigor mortis usually set in after a death? Right, do you know?
I would say
I
about
thought it
an
was
hour or two
immediately.
after. It takes a little while because the blood's still flowing and stuff, but it's rather quick. It just goes away after 24 to 36 hours.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it set in like within a few hours or within a day or so.
I would say within the first few hours.
Okay.
There was also the most recent case, who was Dakota James, and this was in 2017, so it was just a few years ago. And his body was found in the Ohio River, and again, his death was reported as an accidental drowning. But when they investigated the death and it was reopened a year later, photos of the crime scene and the body showed that there were some slight ligature markings around his neck, which may have indicated a strangulation. And there's also blood pooled into his fingertips, like he was trying to take that strangulation or trying to take whatever was around his neck away, and there was a struggle. But still, it was reported before that was an accidental drowning. So it kind of doesn't all add up.
It's like they don't want to launch a full investigation when there's so few clues available because they don't want to waste their time on it. Although it wouldn't be a waste of time if they catch a serial killer.
Right, and there's no conclusion if this is one person, if this is a group of people, if it's the same people, because these are all different locations over the course of almost 20 years, and it doesn't add up that it would be one person, but at the same time, if it was multiple, how have we not caught them yet, if this is in truth happening?
Well, and also to get the pattern, because the pattern itself on this map could be very coincidental, but the way that it's laid out and everything too, it's like, how is this not, like, seriously?
It's too ironic to just let go.
And coordinating, it would have to be a small group of people to coordinate it to make it into this pattern, is my thought.
And if you look at the map too, there are so many very populous areas. I mean, you have the East Coast, you have the Midwest, but these are big areas. There's a lot of waterways.
It's a very large area that it spreads over, though. Do you think this person's working alone?
It would be very difficult to.
Yeah, that's
but
what I'm
also
thinking.
the smiley faces, like Dave said, there's smiley faces at every crime scene. Even though it's a very common source to graffiti, a very common artistic style, it's still a smiley face. Of all things, it's a smiley face, and that's the same consistency throughout.
Well, there are copycat killers too. You know, so that is a possibility. But I would say that it'd be no more than 2 to 3 people working together. And it is over the course of 20 years, so it is completely plausible for it to be a single person.
Plausible, yes. But if that single person were able to take down these very athletic, strong, popular males, or at least target them, there's too many variables.
Oh, I just
I like the
noticed.
thought of being, some sort of like really pretty girl that's doing this, and it's like luring these boys where they're like, "Oh, she can't do anything. She's harmless," and then that's what gets them.
Right. Which would explain how there's GHB or roofies in their bloodstream.
Let's do roofies together. Let's just be crazy. Oh my god, you took too much? Oh, that's a pity.
Oh no.
Well,
Let's
I'm
go
also
first.
noticing, like, there's 2, because I saw the red lines. That's what I've been focusing on, too. But I just saw the 2 white lines that are creating 2 little fangs.
Yeah.
In the smile. That's creepy as fuck.
Like an evil smile.
Yeah. Like a little pumpkin smile.
But yeah, there's no for sure answer to who this person or people are. There's a lot of investigations being reopened because of it. Because again, these cases were closed. It was an accidental drowning, case closed. So there's some detectives that are reopening them in order to find out for sure, is it a questionable case and should it be reopened to see, was it actually murder or should it be reinvestigated?
That is really bizarre, because a lot of this could come down to coincidence. But, I mean, there's some of it that leads me to think that, you know what, there's got to be more to it, whether it's copycat killer or not.
Right. It all adds up. But yeah, those are the smiley face killers. And there's a TV show too on it. That I'm trying to see which channel it is. It's like A&E or Oxygen. I think it's Oxygen. But there's a docu-series for the smiley face killers if anybody's interested. It's on Amazon right now.
Ooh.
Cue creepy music. All
Yeah.
right. So I'll do my second one then. So this is the Dyatlov Pass incident. So let's go back to February of 1959 in the Soviet Union. All right, so a group of students went to the Ural Mountains, and these were experienced students for hiking. The party consisted originally of 8 men and 2 women. However, one of the men had to drop out early on in the trip due to illness. They were all in attendance of the Ural Polytechnical Institute. The expedition was led by Igor Dyatlov, so that's where we get the pass name for it. He agreed to, so they traveled up to where they were going to go hiking. He agreed to send a telegram once they returned to the Zai, no later than February 12th. But before leaving, he said they anticipated to be a little bit longer. So when the 12th came and passed, no alarm was actually raised. On the 20th, the hikers' families demanded that a search and rescue be launched, so the Institute sent one consisting of volunteers and of students and teachers. By the 26th, they found the camp. The tent appeared to be about half torn down, covered in some snow. All belongings, including shoes, were left behind in the tent, and the tent also appeared to be cut open from the inside. 9 sets of footprints led out from the tent in either sock feet or barefoot and led to the edge of a nearby wood almost about a mile away. So under a large Siberian pine, they found the remains of a campfire. And here is where the 2 bodies were first found. They were shoeless and only in their underwear. Some branches off of the pine were broken up to 5 meters up, suggesting somebody tried to climb the tree, and it could be either in search of something, to escape something, or maybe get their bearings. A little bit later, between the pine and the actual camp where the tent was, 3 more bodies were found staggered out. So not right next to each other. They were several hundred feet apart. The poses of the bodies suggest that they were trying to return back to the camp. 2 months after this, the last 4 campers, or hikers, were found under 13 feet of snow in a ravine 75 meters, which is 246 feet, further away from the pine tree opposite direction of the tent. The autopsy reports revealed that 6 of the 9 had died from hypothermia, which, I mean, you're doing a ski hiking trip, so, I mean, snow, cold. So hypothermia, especially if you're running out of the tent undressed, is a very real and a very fast problem. One of the hikers died of internal bleeding from severe chest trauma. One other was listed as chest trauma is the cause of death, and 1 fatal skull injury. There were no indications of anybody else except for the hikers that were nearby. Radiation was found on the clothing of 1 victim, because 1 victim was actually found with some shorts on. Everybody else was either naked or in their underwear. So that alone is bizarre. And the released documents of the autopsies did not contain any information regarding the internal organs. So they could not determine, anybody reading the report could not determine were there drugs involved. So first thought was that it was an avalanche. So, but the problem is that studies had shown that there were no signs of an avalanche taking place in the area, especially for where the bodies were found around the pine. They were covered in a light layer of snow around the pine area and between the pine and the tent. Also, if an avalanche had occurred, it would not have hit the location where the tent was. And the fact that they saw the footprints leaving the camp area and found it leading to the spruce, if there was an avalanche, how would there be footprints left behind to begin with? Footprints also indicated, based off of the pattern and the strides, that it was not consistent with a group of people, let alone a single person, leaving in a panic. Yeah.
They were calm, and they split up without any explanation as to why.
Right. So in April 12th, 2018, one of the bodies was exhumed per the request of a journalist because some of the files got declassified. Because for some reason they did the investigation. Where was that? I had that in my notes somewhere. I'm a terrible, terrible person. Okay, so the investigation had ceased by May 1959 due to a lack of a guilty party. However, the files at the time were sent to a secret archive. They were later declassified, so that way in April 12th of 2018, a journalist was able to look at this case and request one of the bodies to be exhumed. The odd part is that the DNA of the person that it was supposed to be did not resemble that of the living relatives, and the person that it was supposed to be was also not recorded to have been buried at that particular graveyard. Injuries were consistent with that of being hit by a car, and not of what was reported for the death of that individual. Because I think this was one of the hypothermia victims. One of the attendees of the funeral, when it did happen, said that the bodies had a deep brown tan. That is consistent with radiation. If they had received a high dose of radiation all of a sudden, like in a flash, that would be consistent with radiation. There were some hikers that were about 31 miles away during this time that had reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky in the direction of where this camp was. I know, it's aliens.
Aliens!
Where was this again, if you can remind me real quick?
This is in the Soviet Union.
Okay.
In the north. I'll post another link to the Wikipedia page that can actually provide you a map to give you kind of a geographical sense of where this was located, because the Soviet Union is pretty damn huge.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So there was another theory that it had been some of the local Mansi people.
Mansi?
Mansi, M-A-N-S-I. All right, which are some native, like they're the Native Americans of that area.
Okay.
All right. Where did that go? So they were, because they can be very territorial. They're reindeer herders, and they can be very territorial. However, there was no the force of the injuries for the three students that actually had injuries on them. It was not consistent. The force was too strong. There was no soft tissue damage, which soft tissue damage would have resulted from a man-made injury, such as being hit with something, whether it's fists, a club, or anything like that. The Mansi people were also investigated and given interviews, and they were actually really pissed off, like, how dare you accuse us of this and all that. Oh, Mooncloud is also saying that radiation poisoning can also damage the DNA, which could lead to why the DNA did not match any of the local, the living relatives of that person who was exhumed.
And they also mentioned, too, that meteors can carry that material, that radioactive material. So since it's located in the Soviet Union, more towards the northern part of the Earth, there might be a lot of activity. And I mean, there's been videos reported too a lot more recently on YouTube where there's been meteorites and different kind of not extraterrestrial, but out of this world material that's landed in that region because of how close it is to that northern tip of the planet, that there's possible of that kind of hitting the atmosphere. And
well, what about like 5-6 years ago? There was that meteor that went really low to the ground in Siberia. I think it was Siberia,
exactly, yeah.
And exploded actually in the air, luckily, because that would have created a lot of damage otherwise.
Right. Right. But there's a lot of activity with that too.
Oh yeah, there is. Now there are two other theories to this of what happened. Infrasound, and yes, I'm not slurring. It's INFRA sound. So one theory is that the winds generated around the peaks that got around to them produced a sonic frequency that is capable of inducing panic attacks. Now, they are finding out scientifically more and more about this, about how sound frequencies and vibrations can interact with human physiology. So that is a plausible theory. Because the theory also states that as they would have neared the ravine, and the sound wears off, they would have been able to regain their composure. However, in the dark, they would have been confused which direction they had gone and how to get back. And the injuries of the 3 individuals could have been falling over the edge of the ravine into it. You know, thinking fall damage.
Which would be consecutive with something that if you were to be hit by a car, that kind of trauma.
Yeah. But that's the weird thing, is that there would have been some soft tissue damage there where other reports didn't report. So it could have been that they did have soft tissue damage and the autopsy was botched. That's a possibility too. However, it depends on how the panic attack was, because the footprints indicated that there was not a panicked rush or anything. So maybe it wasn't necessarily a panic attack, but just a mass confusion. Maybe they were thinking they were seeing things, hearing things, or whatever. Then there's also the theory of military tests, because that's where we go to for all of the major Earth powers in the world, is military testing. But it is possible, because the campsite site fell within a range of a Soviet parachute mine exercise that was being done around that time. Now, records don't confirm or deny that there was a test on that particular day or in that 2-week period that they were skiing through the area, but in those general years that this had occurred. Now, hearing the explosion of the parachute mine, they could have panicked and found themselves unable to return to camp because it was night. Possibly as well as testing a radioactive weapon in the area, which would explain the orange skin and the lights in the sky. Yes, Artanis, the brown note.
And it could be like a combination of these things too.
It could be. So,
which would lead to all the effects.
So, based on this, because they've got very limited data for this, but I'm pretty much ruling out an avalanche theory, because there would have been a lot of debris. You would not have been able to see the footprints, and you know, there was very little snow covering them. Now, the ravine, maybe, possibly avalanche there with the amount 13 feet of snow on top of them in that location. But still, it's an area with a lot of snow anyway. That could have been natural accumulation for a ravine versus a wooded area, which has some shelter. What are your thoughts? Aliens.
I don't know. The radiation thing is kind of throwing me off a bit. Like, so were they near anything radioactive?
No, but that's where the theory of military testing, because they were off in a mountainous area. So that wouldn't have been a good location for any kind of radioactive power plants.
And there wouldn't be any like actual reports on, yes, we were launching this radioactive weapon in the air or on the ground, because that would have been hush hush.
And it could, and if that were the case, it could explain why after, you know, no guilty verdict was found, we're closing the case, that they ended up being classified files.
It just sounds like a freak accident of things that maybe we're not quite sure how to understand or comprehend. Like you mentioned, the whole disoriented kind of situation, which, you know, it's easy to get disoriented in the dark. So I can see that definitely happening.
Well, it is. And I mean, because coming from an area where I'm at where there's a ton of snow, you know, one pine tree looks like another, and especially at night, you know, I mean, this is 1970, or no, not 1970. Sorry. This is 1959. So the kind of camping equipment they would have had, they wouldn't necessarily have had batteries with flashlights at the ready, because that kind of cold drains batteries.
Right.
So, and if they left the tents in confusion, panic, or whatever the case may be, they wouldn't have even had their little lantern. You know, Mooncloud does say here that nuclear testing has been known to cause flare-ups of the aurora borealis. Following testing near the Arctic Circle is why a U-2 pilot got lost and wound up over the USSR on an atmospheric sampling mission. Unfortunately, it happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, heightening tension and fear of on Black Saturday. which I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
that whole thing, but maybe that's something we can cover on a later date, because I feel like we could do like part 2 and 3 at least of Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those out there.
Yeah.
I think radiation for sure had a role in this because it does explain the coloring of the skin, the altering of the DNA, and the kind of reaction that these people had of disillusioned confusion of where they are, because it doesn't make sense if there were some other kind of weapon attack or just overall hysteria, that they would be leaving the campsite calm, not rushing out, which doesn't add up to why their treading would be so short versus kind of crazy all over.
Right. And they may have had a disagreement about which way the camp was. So that's why you have the 3
Mhm.
that were returning in one direction and the other, and 3 of them that ended up in the ravine. Because going to a ravine when you already are getting hypothermia, I mean, they had different, like, because levels of hiking certificates. So these, all of these people, except for the person leaving it, had, like, I forget what the degree was called, but it was this number 2 in the series. And after completing this hike, they would have all earned their 3rd mark certificate.
So they're pretty experienced climbers, hikers.
Yeah, so leaving the
weird.
tent in that way, not very clothed, in the snow and everything, just did not make sense from any kind of logical standpoint. Now, countries including our own are known for doing weapons testing in remote areas, and this is a remote area. So to me, I think it's likely that there was some weapons testing, and of course, militaries keep that stuff hush hush. So a group of students from the local institute wouldn't have known that they were going to do testing in that area, nor would they have checked to see if anybody was climbing in the area at that time.
But still would relate back to the nuclear activity, radiation poisoning, to explain some of the other factors.
Well, doesn't radiation poisoning also, when it gets to a certain level, can potentially cause confusion and deliriousness? Okay.
Strange.
My money's on that. What about you, Destiny?
I agree.
Kat, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it could always be aliens.
Oh, radioactive bear. Shut up.
Oh
Mr.
my
T.
god. Like I said, like one of these days, I'm gonna just let T have his day, and we're gonna do off the wall theories on shit. We'll let him have his fun.
I mean, it's still a possibility. It's just not a likelihood.
Electromagnets. Fuck off, DJ. All right, I need to use the little girls' room, but Destiny, do you want to lead us off with your next topic?
Sure thing. So my next topic is on DB Cooper, which most people, I feel like, I've heard about this story. This was back in 1971. On November 24th, a man by the name of Dan Cooper bought a one-way $20 ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines with cash from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s and wearing a business suit and tie and overcoat. I think like some sort of like brown loafers. He carried a black briefcase and a brown paper bag. And after a few hours after the flight took off, Cooper handed the stewardess a note where she immediately put it in her pocket without even looking at it. And then Cooper kind of was like, "Hey, you should look at that note. I have a bomb." Which I think is hilarious because he was trying to be super, he was like trying to be like, "Hey, like you should probably look at this note because I've got a bomb." And then the stewardess is like, oh, "Okay," just slips it in her pocket without reading. He's like, "No, I have a bomb." "Oh yeah, sorry, other passengers, I have a bomb." Just trying to be quiet about it, but this bitch didn't read the note. He informed the stewardess that the bomb was in his briefcase and asked her to sit next to him. He opened his briefcase for her to showcase what appeared to be a bomb, complete with some crazy wiring, a timer, and 4 red-colored sticks. The typical bomb in a briefcase situation. He then requested that the stewardess write down what he was saying and take it to the captain and his instructions were as follows. I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash and exclusively in $20 bills. I want it put in a knapsack, and I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job. No funny stuff, see? I'll do the job. So his expectations were basically get this plane to land, I'll let everybody go, and then we're going to take off to another destination. So I guess that was his purpose here. When the plane landed, he exchanged the passengers for the money and the parachutes. Cooper kept some of the crew members on the plane and instructed the captain to drive to Mexico City, requesting that the plane remain below 10,000 feet. When the plane was flying somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, Cooper jumped out of the rear door of the plane with 2 of the parachutes, and the money never to be seen again. So that was the last time he was quote-unquote seen. A year after the hijacking, letters were sent to the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and Seattle Times confessing to the crime. Some people confessed the crime. Some people eulogized a recently deceased DB Cooper, kind of like saying that he's been dead or he has died, or somebody was also claiming to be his brother. It's just basically a case of people trying to mimic the killer just to get like moments of fame. You know what I mean? This is back in the 70s. We didn't have the internet. 2 people were actually arrested for impersonating DB Cooper and trying to sell his quote-unquote story to a tabloid. So there's a lot of chaos. A lot of people knew about it at the time. People are trying to get in on the action and get into the news media because, you know, they're bored, I guess.
That whole wanting your 15 minutes of fame.
Right. Like I said, it's back in the 70s. There's no internet. So leads were tracked all over the country. There were 800 suspects in total considered for the first 5 years of the investigation. This was narrowed down to 24 people. I'm not going to name, obviously, all 24. We're just going to go through a few that could potentially be the suspects, right? So the first suspect, his name is Richard Floyd McCoy, which is a cool name. 5 years after DB Cooper's escape, police arrested Richard for hijacking an airplane. When the case was examined, the McCoy heist was eerily similar to the Cooper heist. Whereas McCoy had hijacked a plane and parachuted off, he jumped off the back rear staircase of a Boeing 727, which is the same plane that Cooper had jumped out of. He requested 4 parachutes, and he also passed notes to the flight attendants claiming a bomb was on board, as well as using the phrase, "no funny stuff." So that's kind of similar how 2 different people hijacked a plane and had the same kind of stuff going on.
How many years after the incident was that again? Like 5 years?
5 years.
That could easily be a copycat case. Because like you said, there was no internet. That would have been like all over the news everywhere.
So it's either eerily similar, as in it could be the same person, or just somebody who's like, I thought this was a cool thing. I want to do it too. But he was eventually ruled out as a suspect because he didn't fit the description of Cooper. But they did look kind of similar. That's something that apparently was notated. But I guess just didn't fit the full description. The second one is a man named Dwayne Weber. He claimed to be DB Cooper on his deathbed. Again, could just be somebody wanting their little fame. He confessed to his wife before he died, I have a secret to tell you. I'm Dan Cooper. Which, I don't know why I find this funny. I just think it's funny that his last words are, I have a secret to tell you. I'm Dan Cooper. And then he just dies. And the wife is like, what?
That's like saying, I'm Batman right before you die.
The wife is like, just left with that information. But the wife eventually had to reflect on what he said, and she was like, well, there are some clues that could probably tie him in. Apparently, Dwayne had nightmares where he would talk in his sleep about leaving fingerprints on an airplane. He also had a knee injury that he claimed he got from jumping out of a plane. He also had an old Northwest Airlines ticket for no reason. all of these things could have explanations. This is back in the time where, wars and stuff are going on. You could jump out of planes and get an injury. And I keep all my tickets for things. So, I mean, maybe it was just a sentimental ticket. Who knows? He did, though. So it's not like we'll ever know.
Yeah, he could have been obsessed with Cooper, like Moon's saying.
Right. And then the last one I'm going to mention, his name was Kenneth Christensen. So the brother of Kenneth had seen an episode of the Unsolved Mystery series that included the story of DB Cooper, and he was convinced that that was his brother. On Kenneth's deathbed, he informed his brother, there is something you should know, but I can't tell you. And then he died. So what is up with these people that are like, I have a secret, and then just immediately just die right there? Whatever.
Oh my God.
That cliffhanger.
So dramatic. Kenneth was a flight pursuer for the Northwest Orient Airlines, which is the same airline that DB Cooper had hijacked. He also loved bourbon, which that's a key point there, because when DB Cooper was on his flight, he asked for a bourbon and Coke. And also bought a house right after the crime was done with DB Cooper. That could just be coincidence. When the stewardess of the incident was shown a photo of Kenneth, she did state that he looked the closest to Cooper than anyone else she'd ever seen as far as like the photo lineups. But she did clarify and say, I just can't say for sure.
Well, and after so much amount of time goes by, the image fades in your head. So it would be hard to give a positive ID that, yeah, that's definitely him.
Right. And like I said, it was narrowed down to 24 different leads. Those are just 3 of them. I personally think that the actual DB Cooper died in the fall outside of the plane. Now, it was evident that he was not an expert parachuter. And then the reason why this is, at first they thought he was, because obviously he requested the parachutes, and they just assumed that he knew what he was doing. But when he jumped out of the plane, it was pitch black outside. It was nighttime. It was also raining. And on top of that, you have 200-mile-per-hour winds fighting against you when you're jumping out of the plane. There was no visibility of the ground when he jumped out because of the cloud coverage that night. And he jumped over a heavily forested area. That's not it, but he also jumped out using only 2 of the parachutes that he requested. He asked for 4, but only 1 of the parachutes actually functioned. The other one was just a training parachute that was sewn shut, so he couldn't use that one. The functional parachute was a military parachute that you couldn't steer. So when you jump out, once you pull it out and initiate the parachute, you're just at the mercy of wherever the wind takes you. So
New theory. He put on the training. He took to put on the training parachute, not knowing it was a training parachute, and he just gets impaled by a tree.
His body and the chutes were never found, so no evidence was found. But it was over a large forested area, so there's a chance that maybe he just wasn't found because it was just a large, heavily forested area and just wasn't found. But and this was back in the fucking 70s? Yeah. 71. So
did he have the money with him too? Is that documented?
There was a paper bag of money found at a bar. I forgot what the bar was, like Tina's Bar or something like that. I can't remember what state it was, but it was there were serial numbers on cash, and the serial numbers in this bag reflected the same serial numbers that he had been given for that money for the ransom or whatever. However, it was only like a portion. So I'm assuming he had a few bags with him when he jumped out. And I think as sad as it is, as he's parachuting, as he's jumping to his death, he's realizing he's not going to be able to actually live through this. He's probably let go of the money and they just flown about in whatever directions. But one of the bags was found near that bar. But that's my thought. I think he thought it was gonna be real cool. He also jumped out in fucking like loafers, like brown loafers, a business suit, a trench coat, and some really weird glasses.
Someone's been watching too much James Bond.
Right. He thought he was gonna jump out, and he's like, I'll have a bourbon and a Coke. And then he drinks his bourbon and Coke, and then he jumps out of the plane, and then he realizes his parachute is sewn shut and just falls to his death. I mean, it is possible that he did open the military parachute and he was able to drift to safety. Who knows? It's always a possibility. and that one of the suspects could actually be him and that he lived. But I just think personally that he just plummeted to his death and it was very traumatic.
What do you think, Chad? I'm leaning more to the he did not survive aspect of it.
I mean, why? No sane person who knows that how parachuting works would jump out in the middle of the night, especially not knowing what's below you. Like it could have been water.
Unless it is like a true person in the military that is experienced. But if he's not experienced, then it doesn't make sense that he would do that.
Yeah. Well, they mentioned that typically anybody who is an experienced person who does parachuting, they would not take that risk because of the winds, the rain, and on top of that, how dark it was, and there was no visibility due to the clouds. But yes, yeet, that is exactly what he did.
Oh my god. Yeah, it's because I mean, think about it. In our age of information, like we could look up, potentially look up how parachuting works and look up instruction videos and everything to see how it's done. But even though we have that capability right now, most people don't know how to operate a parachute. Other than what you see in movies, like, oh, I just pull this cord and the parachute comes out. But if you
experienced.
But if you were actually handed the parachute, 9 times out of 10, you would need a quick rundown of how it operates. So if this is back in 1971, the amount of that knowledge for a random Joe who has no parachuting experience whatsoever, like that just doesn't compute.
But at the same time, with all the people that came after that were saying either I am this person or I have some shared similarities with the case, this is something that is not hidden from the world. It is public knowledge. All the details of the case are out, so people can easily either duplicate it or they can say, oh, I did it for that fame, like we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Oh my god, Chad did take a Three Stooges turn. We got YOLO, we got Yeet. Damn, my secret is out. I'm DB Cooper, according to Croc.
Croc, I know your secret.
I love Arcanus's response.
I also love the fact that his name was Dan Cooper, right? And nobody knows where the name DB Cooper came from. The letters DB, they're like the
what was his middle
people,
name?
I don't remember, honestly. I know that he signed off on his ticket as Dan Cooper. They don't even know if that's a real person, if I recall correctly. That was obviously back then, they didn't really do identification and stuff. You just wrote down on a ticket what your name was, and that was that. But he signed it off as Dan Cooper. And then somehow DB happened, and people are like, nobody knows who this guy is. It's just his name is DB Cooper or Dan Cooper because of his plane ticket. And then somehow DB Cooper happened, which I think sounds cooler. Dan just sounds like your uncle, but I don't know.
I think it's connected to the Isdal lady. I think they were all in on it, and I think this is all interweaved into some mass theory of some sort.
There's some theories that whoever this person is was like a supervisor for the airlines, and that's how they knew what to ask for, which plane to take. Just very familiarized with the plane structure. But there's a lot more evidence in this that, obviously I can't go over because we have a limited time frame, but definitely look into it. It's very interesting case.
It really
I think he's isn't he on the FBI Most Wanted too, or at least one of those members?
He's not as, I think as of like a few years ago, they kind of closed the case, but they're open for leads. But I think at this rate, they're just assuming he's dead.
Especially since the amount of time that went by, like he couldn't be any. Even if he was alive today, he'd be no threat.
Yeah, he was in his 40s back then in the 70s, so it's been some time.
He'd be lucky to be alive now because that would put him at. He's in his 40s in the 1970s, so.
Maybe he bought out.
He'd be like he'd be in his 90s now. If he was still alive, he'd be in his 90s.
Yeah, that's why they kind of closed it and was like, "We'll take more information if it comes, but we're just kind of closing this now."
Yeah, I think that's where that one's just gonna land. Is it's over.
Yeah.
The only thing you're gonna get is hearsay from this point on. All right, so The last one we have for today's podcast is a little bit shorter and also to prove that not all mysteries end in death. So we're going to talk about the Sleeping Beauty of Okno. Now, this is regarding Karolina Olsen. She was born in 1861. Her father was a fisherman, and her family did also do a little bit of farming. She had 4 siblings. So and this is like a little island area, if I remember right. Kind of an island area, or kind of a little bit of a peninsula or something going out into a body of water near where they lived. So they lived in the lowlands kind of area. And I should specify this is in Sweden. It looks like I did not write down the actual near town names because I can't freaking pronounce it. But anyway, she fell on the ice on her way home one day about at the age of 14, and she had either chipped a tooth or lost a tooth during her fall. She returned home, and her mother looked her over, and being that the family was poor, she could not afford a doctor. So her father's just like, well, she was sent to bed that night, it'll be okay. The problem is that she didn't wake up. And this started a coma lasting 32 years. Now, keep in mind, this is 1861. They did not have life support systems like we do now to keep somebody enough nutrients in the body and everything else and keep them going. Mm-hmm. Now, after a few days, the neighbors paid for a doctor to come and visit the family. The doctor and her family did try to wake her through various methods, poking her with sharp needles and even holding a flame near her skin, like assuming from a candle. And she just looked like she was sleeping, and no matter what they did, they couldn't wake her and couldn't wake her. To keep her alive, they force-fed her 2 glasses of milk a day sweetened with some honey. Now, the doctor couldn't figure it out or anything, and word got out, and other doctors would come and they would visit the family at their home. And they noted that while she was in her coma, her nails did not grow, and neither did her hair. And in fact, during the whole 32-year time period, she did not age hardly one bit. Eventually, she was put in the hospital for a little while and subject to different kind of therapies or treatments, including electroconvulsive therapy. Some doctors thought that it was a result of a hysteria of some sort. Many were skeptical and eventually just threw their hands up, saying that she just has dementia paralytica. And that's what the official diagnosis was when she was released from the hospital in August 2nd, 1892, while still in a coma. She was cared for at the family home and everything up until when her mother passed away, where a nurse came, or a maid basically, would come and take care of her and the family. And when she found out that her mother had died, the nurse stated that she was crying uncontrollably and inconsolably, even though she did not wake up from her coma. Skeptics think that she and her mother were trying to keep this kind of ruse alive, and her mother would help her, and like she would just scramble back to bed when anybody would get near. But that doesn't really explain how a 14-year-old would not react to being burned by a candle or poked with sharp needles.
Wait, did you say that she was in a coma, but she cried when it was made known that her mother died?
Yes.
So she started weeping in her sleep?
Mm-hmm. Like, there were times where she would moan. There were times where she would roll over. And it just looked like she was in a sleep. Like she was sleeping the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could be like a ruse thing where, oh God, what's that case with that one mom that made her daughter think that she was sick and just would tell doctors that she was sick, and this girl believed that she was sick the whole time just so the mom can get like sympathy. I can't remember what that person was called, but there are cases where parents will make their kids seem sick, and the kids will go along with it for attention.
Like Munchausen or something like that syndrome, where the mom does it, where and the kids don't necessarily go along with it. Sometimes the mom will hurt the kid to get the attention. Sometimes the kids will go along with it. But like even in the hospital, she was subject to electroconvulsive therapy, where they shoot electricity into you at higher rates than a TENS unit to force your muscles to do shit. If she was awake, there would have been some kind of reaction, but apparently there was none.
Yeah,
I
and
could-
that may have. Go ahead, Destiny.
I was gonna say I can understand, like I could, if I really committed, I probably wouldn't react to a needle being put in my skin or even a flame. Like it would hurt, I might wince, but like at the same time, that is strange about the whole electrocution thing, because your body will move from that regardless. That's involuntary movement at that point.
And I know that there's health conditions out there. I think one of them's congenital insensitivity to pain, where they just don't feel pain. They could be cut, they could be scraped, they could be burned, they could be poked, but they don't feel pain, so they don't react. So maybe that's one of the rare cases of that. I wouldn't say syndrome, but a condition.
But for all of that to line up together in the late 1800s, that's what I mean. Given the time period that this was and everything, here's the link for you, Stromberg. Yeah, you can actually see the area where this happened. But she did eventually wake. So her mother had died in 1904. So she finally woke up in April 3rd of 1908. She was highly confused, scared. The maid said that she found her crying and jumping on the floor. Her surviving brothers came in to see her, so I didn't find a note of it, but apparently at least one of her brothers had died during this time period. But she did not recognize them. Now, she was unable to talk for the first couple of days. After that, she was able to with great difficulty, and then obviously over time, it became easier and easier. She was also sensitive to light during that time. After waking up, she remembers everything that she learned, taught, like everything before her coma. So it's like she went into a sleep and or a hibernation, and 32 years later, she's coming out of it to this whole different world, like a Rumpelstiltskin, or not Rumpelstiltskin. God, who am I thinking of? Oh God, I can't remember. Anyway,
Beauty?
no, there was I think it was like a colonial time story where the guy drank some beers with some giants who were playing 8-pin, fell asleep, and woke up like 20 years later. Rip Van Winkle, yeah, that's it. It's like a Rip Van Winkle story. Like it's just like she went to sleep, and then 32 years later she woke up, and then everything around her is different. It'd be like a nightmare. She said she remembered having dreams and everything through that time, but does not remember anything that happened during the time that she was in a coma.
Yet she wept.
Yeah, she wept. I'm thinking that it was a subconscious thing that happened. Like, she could... Because there's still no proof that you can remember or understand things in a coma, but to still talk to the patient in case that they can. So even to this day, we don't understand how people who are in a coma react to different things around them. So it's possible that she reacted to it on a subconscious level in her sleep, but just doesn't remember it because of the coma-like state.
There's also the thing where there's sometimes where people are in like surgeries, like they get put under anesthesia, and they are able to recount everything that happens, or everybody that, like, they might not be able to see everything, but they can hear everything that's happening or feel everything that's happening. It might be like a similar case where maybe at times she was subconsciously aware of what was going on around her.
I'm thinking that's likely the case, but she just can't recall any of it because of the amount of time that she was out.
It's kind of like having a dream. You don't always remember the dream right after you wake up. Sometimes for some reason it just leaves your brain.
Exactly. Now, some interesting facts about this is that during this time, her muscles did not atrophy. And at 46 is how old she was when she woke up. She was stated to have looked in her mid-20s. I want to look like that in my mid-40s.
It might be because they
Right?
kept her well hydrated, but also she wasn't making any facial expressions. A lot of wrinkles happen because you're like raising your eyebrows or being angry or smiling a lot. She wasn't making any facial expressions, so maybe that's the secret. We just gotta not react to anything.
Don't react to anything. Be
Yeah,
like
just
that.
be emotionless.
But I mean, what gets me though is the fact that the muscles didn't atrophy. Even somebody who is bedridden for months, their muscles will start to atrophy, meaning that it's difficult to use them. You're losing muscle mass and strength in them. But this didn't happen.
Could the milk have something to have played with it since they force fed her milk every day? Maybe the nutrients in that helped?
I doubt it, because you would think that the tube feeding that happens for coma patients today would prevent their muscles from being atrophied, but they still are.
That's strange.
Yeah. Now, after she woke up, she did agree to psychiatric testing to see how she is, because they thought that during this time, a lot of things were just chalked up to unknown psychological diseases or ailments. But she was determined to be in full control of her faculties after she woke up and was able to talk and move. Many wanted to interview her and her family, so they actually escaped into hiding after this point to avoid all the attentions. But she had a problem adjusting to life for the longest time, but she ended up leading a very quiet, peaceful, and simple life after all this. She died at the age of 88 in 1950 due to an intracranial hemorrhage in her old age. Now, during this whole time that she was out, it was basically 2 glasses of milk a day, because she wasn't really, other than the time that she was put in the hospital for a little bit for specialists and doctors from all over the world to look at her. But everybody would just throw their hands up and say that it's hysteria paralytica, because that's what everything came down to, especially with women during that time frame. Unfortunately, it's hysteria. It's a psychological problem that they have. And that can be probably covered on another podcast, because, a husband at that time could easily say that their wife was insane, whether she was or not, and you would be put into the insane asylum. So that's why I'm linking those two together, because doctors at the time, if it was anything psychological, because they can't find anything physical, they chalk it up to hysteria or some kind of psychological disorder and leave it at that. Yeah, well, men be crazy too, Mr. T.
I'd be crazy.
We're crazy because the men are assholes.
Wow.
Wait, did that just come out of my mouth? Anyway, so I firmly think that it is a very strange case. But there was a case in, I think, the early 2000s where a teenage girl fell into the same type of coma. However, this only lasted for 2 months. But all of the other similarities were there. Muscles didn't atrophy. She was in a dreamlike state. You could not wake her up. And doesn't remember anything during that time, but remembers everything beforehand and seemed mentally just fine and normal afterwards.
Very strange.
What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
I didn't know you can keep somebody alive with milk and honey.
Well, like you said, I mean, in addition to not really moving her facial expression at all, I mean, she's not moving around, so the killing of calories, I mean, she had very pale skin and she was rather skinny by the time she came out of it. But, I mean, she wasn't so skinny to look emaciated.
And at the same time, if you're lying down for that sort of time period, there's blood pooling wherever it's in contact with what you're lying on. So there has to be some kind of movement or maybe massaging of the blood flow in order for the muscles to kind of contract. And
I wonder if back then
whatnot.
they knew how to, because you know how like in nursing homes and hospice care, they have to kind of shift the people on their side or
rotate them.
yeah, so that way they don't get the bed, what do they call it, bed bruises, whatever it is, like
Bed sores.
bruising, yeah, bed sores, so that way they don't get the bruising. I wonder if they knew to do that with her to avoid that, or if she just laid in one spot forever.
I don't know because, like, I know that around the 1950s they had like the pulley system where you'd basically be hanging in like, you know, a set of several straps or a hammock like position where they can just use some pulleys and turn you over. You know, they have something much different now. But here's like, I was going over this last night, and Artanis was in the room, and he's like, stuff's going in. How do they deal with the stuff going out? And we learned more about catheterization than we ever wanted to.
Do you know they put a big
Gotta
butt
come
plug in you
somewhere.
when they embalm you? All people.
They put a big
So-
plug in your butt.
Yep.
Ugh.
If you're getting buried and you're going to be in a casket, that's why get cremated if you don't want a butt plug in you. But if you do, listen, I'm just saying, if I'm buried one day, just make sure mine's got a jewel at the end of it, okay?
Good to know. We'll make sure that's in your will.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
They glue your oh.
Oh my gosh.
For that big cheese.
Okay.
Oh God, but
Never
no.
gonna happen.
I just think it's a curious because the thing that I'm stuck on, and I don't know why, is the lack of atrophy in the muscles. Because like in today's
Doesn't add
world,
up.
like if somebody was in a coma like that, their muscles would have atrophied, and she would have had to have intense physical therapy and strength training for her to even to be able to walk again.
Yeah.
Because that's what a lot of coma patients, like somebody gets in a car accident and they're in a coma, like they get their muscles are atrophied after being in a coma for so long, and that they need to use walkers and other shit to get around and build up that strength again.
Which means that only if it logically possible, she would have had to have been moving around. Maybe like a sleepwalker. She would have not known she was moving around, but unconsciously she was doing it to get the blood flowing and not atrophy.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been a couple cases like it, none that have lasted this long, but there have been a few other cases like it, but it's extremely rare. It's almost like a state of hibernation.
She was turning into a bear.
A bear that sleeps for 32 years. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Just going to sleep and then not waking up for 32 years. Like how much would
I'll
change?
volunteer as tribute.
Because I mean, think about everything that's changed just in our lifetime since we can remember.
Mm-hmm.
She'd have to adjust to so much. Because that's also, you know, the turn of the century is when she woke back up. That was a huge age of innovation and going from having to use outhouses to now you have indoor plumbing and you're starting to get lights that are electric, and you also had the age of the natural gas lighting. You know, so maybe she did move around enough in her sleep to kind of prevent the atrophy. Because like we all
Right.
don't, because like you never wake up in the same position that you went to bed in. Very, very rarely
No.
does that happen. And it could be if they did do massage therapy on her to kind of prevent that. Maybe that had something to do with it too.
Yeah, it could get the blood circulating.
Yeah. All right, but I
Totally.
think that is all we have today. Now, so folks are aware because Destiny's got her new job and she wants to do excellent at it. She is not going to be with us in our next podcast. She's going to kind of be in every other one, but the show is going to go on.
Yes.
So, Destiny, I forgot to tell you, but I do have something lined up for our next podcast in 2 weeks. I wanted to continue that Around the World segment. So, I do have a very special guest lined up for that. We are going to visit the lovely land of England. We're going to have Gary on here from The Lost.
Hooray.
We're going to talk about his pot noodles.
All right.
I figured that would be an interesting one to have, especially since I know that many people in our chat do watch and keep up with The Lost. So I figure having a friendly face on there as well that they're familiar with would be kind of cool too.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
You know, and eventually I am going to ask Rudy so we can get the German perspective as well. I don't know if Rudy will have time for it, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So that's a potential one for the future too.
Definitely. I mean, even if he only pops in for 30 minutes.
Oh yeah. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's podcast. I think this is definitely one that we can have, just like the conspiracy theories. We can keep this one going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's plenty
There's
of
always
these to
going
go
to be
through.
mysteries.
We're also going to plan on, once it gets closer to spooky month, we'll do some on serial killers too. So that'll be
Oh,
fun.
definitely. Yeah, we have quite the extensive list. Destiny, I just need to create a Google document, share it with you with our ongoing list.
Yeah, that's probably what's going to be best.
Yeah, because I've got it in my notebook, and I want you to be able to see it, because I've got all the conspiracy theories that are listed out too, in addition to the other things that topics and everything we've come up with over the course of time. Yeah, Rita's in Canada. Kat is no longer in Japan. I have been told that she has moved back to the States, I believe. But being that she did live in Japan for a while, I don't know for how long, we could get her perspective on what life was like in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Lost is an interesting bunch, and we could always have a Mala on here too for Australia.
That's true as well.
All right, folks. I think that's going to be a wrap for today. Destiny, looks like you are not streaming later because you want to play some catch up.
Yeah, I already see that I need emails I got to answer before tomorrow so I don't cry in the morning.
I know the feeling. All right, folks. Thank you very much again. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another podcast with Gary as our guest, and we'll be sorry. And we'll be back tonight at 7 o'clock for another stream. So take care, everybody.